All right. This week's episode is a shout out to all my male audience out there who've been sitting there wondering, how can I champion a woman? How can I support women in their working environment or professional environment or even in their entrepreneur journey? I've been blessed with many male friends who've supported me along my own journey. And every time I've fallen or anytime I have faced gender inequality, my male friends have championed me and have helped me and supported me, not by making it easier for me, but by empowering my voice. And this is the person I want you to meet, David Horne. Now, David is a big advocate for female founders. But here's the thing, he didn't exactly expect to land into this. And it's amazing how he has helped and supported individuals along their journey. This week's episode, he talks about the twists and turns and insights that got him to this point. And I hope it inspires you along the way, or if you've been thinking, how can I champion women even more? Enjoy this week's episode. So if I ain't tell you that this month is going to be about championing women, how on earth did you fall into that you became such a champion for women? Let's get to that.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. So my background is finance. In 2019, I published my first book called Add Then Multiply, which is all about taking what I learned being the chief financial officer of a couple of companies listed on the stock exchange, where we did a lot of fundraising and M&A, mergers and acquisitions, so buying companies, and taking what I learned and applying it more to entrepreneurial businesses. And as a result of that book coming out, I started getting invited to speak at events. And I was speaking at an event in the summer of 2019 about fundraising for small businesses. And a woman came up to me and asked why so little funding went to female founders. And I looked at her and I said, I have no idea, but I'll find out. And Kirti, what I found out shocked me. A week after that event, I was in a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank. She and I had met at a function previously, and this was just a follow-up back, in her office, back when people used to meet in offices. And we had a very pleasant conversation. And towards the end, I thought, well, I'll ask her. And so I said, do you know anything about why so little funding has gone to female founders? And she kind of smiled and reached down into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a bound research report that the British Business Bank had published like 2 months previously.
Okay.
That looked at all of the venture capital deals in the UK in 2017. And they found that all female teams submitted 5% of pitch decks and got less than 1% of money. Mixed gender teams submitted 20% of pitch decks and got 10% of money. And all male teams submitted 75% of pitch decks and got an 89% of money. So I thought, okay, there's definitely something going on here. And I started to research it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I came across the Alison Rose review that had also been published at the beginning of 2019 and looked into all of that. And I thought, okay, there's definitely something going on here. And I carried on researching it. And I saw that the venture capital industry had a few seminars about it, but, whatever. But nobody had done anything from the perspective of the founders themselves. So I thought, okay, I'm going to run an event. And fortunately, from my PLC days, I had some contacts at the London Stock Exchange. And I knew that they had a big theater that seats like 120 people. And so I reached out to them and said, look, I'm thinking of doing this. I think this is a really topical issue. I know the stock exchange has done a lot of work to support women on getting onto boards of listed companies. Would you support this? Would you basically provide the room and the AV for me for free? And they agreed after a bit of negotiation.
Okay.
And so we held our first event on the 25th of November, 2019. We filled the theater. And then we thought, okay, let's take it forward into 2020. Let's do a series of events. And then obviously COVID happened. And so we had to change our plans. We took it online. We ran it online for 2 years on a quarterly basis, but people started to get a bit zoomed out.
Yeah.
And by I think it was the middle of 2021, I think we had like 13 people showed up. And I thought, okay, let's just give it a break. But I carried on doing the research. I carried on doing what I was doing. Publishing stuff. I then researched and wrote my second book, which came out in the summer of 2022. funded female
Ah, but
founders.
you have a foundation about this as well, right? The
I have
funded
a
female.
social enterprise,
You
yes,
do. Okay.
called Funding Focus. Yeah, yeah. So I've set up a social enterprise, and our mission is to level the uneven playing field, basically.
Oh, wow. So you
So
actually
yeah,
just fell into it by accident.
I literally fell into it by accident. I was asked a question. But if you go back in time,
Okay.
so I'm the youngest of four kids. I grew up in Vancouver. And my mom, although she would have hated me calling her a feminist, my mom was an early feminist. And I remember when I was 7 years old, I said to my mom, I really liked chocolate chip cookies and I wanted more. So she taught me how to bake chocolate chip cookies.
Okay.
And when I was 15, I met my first girlfriend, and I said to my mom, I think I look smarter wearing shirts that have been ironed. And she said, great, I'll teach you how to iron shirts.
Okay.
This is in the 60s and the 70s, and those were women's jobs, you know? And my mom taught me to do that, and it was entirely normal. And then when I was 17, I met my wife, and we've been together ever since. So we've been together 45 years coming up
Oh,
this June.
wow. Okay.
And married for 40, it'll be married for 42 years in August. And we have two daughters. So I've just, all my life, I've grown up with a very strong women in my life and a strong sense of duty's not the right word, but commitment to supporting and helping and loving and being nurturing and all of that.
But you never thought that this was going to be
I
it.
never thought that this was going to happen. I never thought at all that this was going to happen. And when I put the first event on, I had no idea where it was going to go.
Did you know at the time of the event as well that this was going to be something you'd wanted to?
It was something it was something that I was interested in, but I had no idea what kind of a reception I was going to get on the day. And I got an outstanding reception on the day, and that confirmed to me that there was really something. And through the work we've done now, I've accumulated a database of about 2,000 mainly female entrepreneurs in, I think, 69 countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
Who support what we're doing, and are generally supportive. And when we have online events, we have good attendance. We held our 5th anniversary conference at the IOD in November and had about 80 people show up in person.
I was going to come for that event, and then I flew out, and I felt so upset, but it looked very
We'll do another one on the 25th of November this year.
I better be here then.
That's our day.
So let's roll it back. So when you went to do this investigation, was there anything surprising you found why the number was so low?
I've done a lot of research into it, and in my opinion, there are 3 primary factors that drive it. Number one is just inherent gender bias. And
that's number one?
Well, number one of 3. There's 3 things.
All right.
I haven't quantified which is the biggest. So, but yeah. But first up is inherent gender bias. And that manifests itself in so many ways. And the women who are listening to this don't need to hear me talk about it because they experience it, daily, weekly, monthly, on a regular basis. So just inherent gender bias. Number 2 is that there is a lack of women in the investment management industry.
There's a lack of women in the investment management industry.
And
even
specifically in decision-making investment roles. There's lots of them in administrative and support roles, but in the roles of, a venture capitalist or someone who's running an investment fund, making the decisions on what they're going to invest in. And the week before we had our first event at the Stock Exchange in November of 2019, Morningstar, which is a big media outfit, published a report. They had looked at all of the fund managers of the nearly 1,500 listed investment companies in the UK. And they found that 108 funds were run by men named David, which I thought was pretty cool. But only 105 funds were run by women. So just 7% of all funds were run by women. And 93% of funds were run by men. 7%. And if you talk to any women who have been involved in the city, for an extended period of time, they've had to behave in ways to survive in a very male-dominated industry.
Space. Yeah. It's
And
interesting to
there's
see that.
there's an interesting supplement to that. One of the
Yeah.
things I came across was a study by a woman who's now a professor at London Business School. She was doing her PhD studies at Columbia in New York, and she looked at all of the TechCrunch New York City startup battle pitching contests between 2010 and 2017. And she took all of the videos and downloaded them into some academic meta-analysis software that's beyond my technology skills, and reviewed and came to the conclusion that there was no material difference between the way men and women pitched, but there was a huge difference in the kinds of questions that they were asked, where 67% of the questions asked of male founders were what's called a promotion question. Where are you going to double your market share? Where are you going to find your next 100 employees? And 66% of the questions asked of female entrepreneurs were what's called prevention questions. How are you going to protect your market share from the competition? What if some of your employees leave and steal all of your IP?
That sounds more defensive.
You're very much defensive.
It
They call
sounds
it
like you have
preventive.
to
They call it
defend
preventive.
yourself
Defensive. Yeah.
and
And what's
explain
crazy,
yourself.
what's crazy is both male and female investors showed the same bias.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me actually.
Yeah.
The reason it doesn't surprise me is because there is in and you still see it in today, is that women are actually harsher on women.
Yeah.
They are really hard on women. It's almost like you feel like you have to over explain yourself, even though, you just wonder, why do I have to go through all this hard road? You as a woman would understand, but no, it's not like that.
Yeah. And then the third thing, and this is a really important one, and this is the one that women can do something about, is women tend to be very conservative in their financial projections. And when you look at the way the venture capital market works, venture capitalists in reality are sophisticated gamblers. They go out and they raise an investment fund from institutional investors, university endowment funds, pension funds, etc. And they say, here's our investment thesis, and we're going to go out and invest this money. So they're going to go out and, let's say they raise a fund of $50 million, and they go out and they invest $1 million in 50 different companies. Mm-hmm. They know up front that at least 10 of those 50 companies are going to go bust. And they know that 35 of them are going to become what they call zombies, which just kind of trickles over. It doesn't generate any cash flow, but nobody's going to put any more money into it. And it just kind of keeps going. And they often sell them off to restructuring specialists. And that leaves 5 companies, and 2 or 3 of them, they'll get their money back. And 1 or 2 of them, they'll get a decent return. And one of them, they hope, becomes a unicorn, which is $1 billion company. Mm-hmm. And that unicorn pays back all of the losses, pays back all of the return, pays back all of the capital, pays the carried interest that the venture capitalists earn. And happy days, aren't they the smartest people on the planet? But in reality, they are sophisticated gamblers.
So is that not a reason why they're quite conservative then? Because they're worried about this?
No, because I think female founders don't get invested in because they're too conservative, because the venture capitalists are looking to say, does this opportunity have the potential to become a unicorn? And if it doesn't, I'm not interested. And I've seen this in many interactions I've had with female founders where, well, we don't want to overdo it too much. And sometimes it's a genuine thing. Like, I don't want to grow into a unicorn. I don't want the burden of that. I've got a family, I've got other commitments, all of those kind of things. And that's all well and good. But if that's the case, then don't go after venture capital money, because you're not going to get it. But with the founders that I have seen, they'll do a detailed calculation and they'll say, I've worked out from my modeling that I need 840,322 pounds. So I'll ask for 750. And a man will run the same model and ask for 2 million.
Yeah, he will not ask for the same amount. He'll ask for higher.
Yeah.
And I know that it's said that we always ask for lower because, for one, we're always worried about, can we do it?
Yeah.
And the second is, like you just picked up, is the impact on our personal lives. Because there's so much to go through. I mean,
absolutely.
There's a lot of things that women, we're not still in the gap. The gap is still wide and array. And then there's also a lot of things that we do have to factor in. For example, the cost of being a woman and your body changes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that does cost if you plan to. It's almost sometimes you have to feel like, do I choose a business or a family? Why can't I have both? That
Yep.
narrative.
Yep.
But that also has a financial cost to it.
Very
So
much
if there's if there's sophisticated gamblers, if you say so, right? Is there another way or a pivot that just can support women with all that other way? Is there another way basically, or is there a loophole around this? Does that make sense?
In 2022 and 2023, I tried to raise an investment fund that was going to invest in female founders. We didn't get it away. We couldn't raise the money. Everybody we spoke to said, this is great. This is so necessary. Your timing is really good, but nobody wrote a check.
No, yeah, that conversation.
So we've parked that, and I'm working on a new plan that I'm going to be launching soon, where I'm looking at doing something with female founders on a smaller scale to start. Because one of the pieces of feedback that I got was, while you and the board that you've assembled are all impressive people individually, you've never worked together as a team. Therefore, we can't assess you on your track record.
This is my irritation, though.
Oh, mine too.
On all levels.
Yep.
How do you expect me to track something when you're not giving me a chance? This gets me super annoyed. Even in the funding industry, they're like, have you done it before? I'm like, well, why would I be sitting here otherwise?
You can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It is. So I'm going out. I'm looking to do something on a much smaller scale. I'm initially going to raise £1 million.
Okay.
And I'll do that from angel investors and people that I know. It's still going to be hard work, but I'm confident I can do it. And then I'm going to execute what I'm going to do, which is to create a small group of 5 to 7 female-founded businesses that have complementary offerings so that we can offer across the wider range of the database. Let's say each of those businesses come in and they've got a list of 10,000 customers and prospects.
Yeah.
But if we get 5 of them, then that's 50,000. And let's say 20% is duplicate. So that's 40,000. Mm-hmm. Well, that means each of those companies has the potential of 30,000 new prospects that they can go out and market to. And we'll put structures in place, and we're also going to put technology in place. I'm just working up the plans now.
Ooh, and with AI, I guess.
Absolutely, very much. We're looking to do a substantial investment in AI tools to support these businesses and grow. And the idea is, let's do this and let's run it for a couple of years, demonstrate the growth that we can achieve, get the financial statements audited, then go out to the private equity industry and say, here's what we've done. Now we'd like 10 million and we'll scale it. Prove that over the next 5 years, and then go out and say, right, now we want 100 million and let's really do it.
So actually you are bringing in that missing point that I have a gripe with. Like, I need to have backing, or I need to have someone believe in me, because that's actually what you're really looking for.
And I'm going to create this group.
Yeah.
And there's lots of stuff we have to do to in terms of structure.
Oh, I'm excited.
I'm excited too. It's really cool. And I've got a very dear friend who's a very successful female founder, who hopefully will be the chair. She's agreed in principle, and I've got a meeting with her next week to present it in a bit more detail. She and I worked together 25 years ago, and then she left and set up a small business with 3 colleagues, and they now employ 400 people. So
let's say there's somebody who's interested. They have this idea and they want to grow. They just don't know how. And like as I initially had started with you, my father was very successful. They had a very successful business. I had entered it, and I loved the way he did business, right? But one thing I was raised with was the attitude that actually your husband's going to make the money and he's going to take care of you. Yeah. So it took me a lot of years to really own my self-worth through business. But I can see my narrative always sabotaging me.
And in a lot of cultures, that is the case.
So you said you had 69. So I'm going to ask you to give me courage for other women who've had this situation like I did. In add, then supply and multiply. Women I've seen women who have great ideas. They are anxious, they're eager, but what stops them is funds. How do I get to do all of this without exhausting myself?
Yeah.
What do you think are great starting points? Taking in, like I said, there are a lot of cultures that have this. What would you suggest? Let's think
Well,
along together.
yeah, sure. So first up, um, and I'm not saying this is easy, but first up, they've got to get over that cultural issue. And let's just take the Asian culture, right?
Mhm.
And I've spoken to many Asian women who've had that kind of environment, and we're told, your job is to stay at home and have the children and prepare the food and make the house tidy, and your husband's job
Yeah.
is to go out and make the money, and that's way, and that whole family thing is so very strongly instilled in them.
Yeah.
And they have to find a way to break out of that mindset. And I can't imagine how difficult it must be. But I do know some Asian women who have successfully done it, and it's been very hard.
It's a lot of inner work, I can assure you.
And sometimes in particular has required a lot of long-term reconciliation work with parents and other elder members of the wider family. The younger generation is a lot more forgiving than the older generation. And I think that's just something that we have to live with. But I think, if you can demonstrate the strength to get through that, then you have the strength to get through just about anything, because that's got to be one of the hardest things to do.
I really like that, because you're almost saying the inner resilience is what's going to take you through the stomach of entrepreneuring to going to the funding, because funding can be also like a lot of falls until you refine it, as it were, your message. Correct. Or refine your business.
Correct. Yeah. And then my general advice to entrepreneurs, and again, I actually touched on this in the article this week about my own midlife crisis and all that.
Yes, please.
It doesn't matter how many times you fall down. What matters is how many times you get back up again.
When did you have that realization?
Probably a few years ago. So the midlife crisis was in 2010 till 2012. And then it probably took me 5 years to get over it. And then it took me another 5 years to kind of rebuild my life back up to what I had been used to before and what I do now. That's
a heck of an inner journey as well.
It was.
And not many people take that step, though. Even women who have to undergo what you were saying about internal or generational healing. I would call it generational healing or generation restoring, because there's a lot to that story. There's behind those stories. And when we hear 5 to 10 years, and I understand where you're coming from, because I had a similar feeling. I was very successful at 40, and then I crashed and burned. And it's been taking me a long time to rebuild back.
Yeah.
And in the rebuilding, you also do get a certain you don't feel very confident, and your wordiness, which is very tied to your finances.
So those first 5 years, I mean, I tried to, for your listeners who don't know the background story. So I tried to launch a wine business. It was a disaster. I burned through.
Also, the word daughters in it, right?
My daughters were shareholders in the company. They weren't active in it, but they were shareholders. Okay. It was supposed to be the great tax planning thing, but so it didn't work out, and I burned through £100,000. And when I finally came to the realization that this wasn't working, and I went out and went back to doing finance work, I had lost my mojo, and I was playing really, really small. And it took a few years of playing really, really small. And then I came across a guy who explained to me, you've got this skill set, you've got this knowledge, you've got this experience. How many people do you think have this experience? And I kind of stopped and realized that actually the world that I used to play in, lots of them did, because we were all CFOs of public companies, and that's what we did. But the wider world, they didn't have that experience. And so I started testing it out and working out. And that's what led to writing this first book in 2019. And I would say really it was when this book came out that I finally came to grips with what that whole thing was, what I could offer to the market. And it was really interesting, because having written that book, I had something that said very clearly, this is what I do. And if this is what I do, then everything else is what I don't do. And I was able to go
Oh,
back
that's
to some,
profound.
yeah, and I was able to go back to some clients that I had that no longer were really serving what I wanted to do. And I wasn't serving them as well as I could. And so we sat down and said, look, here's where I'm going. It's not where you're going. Let's work together to find you someone who can serve you better, because that's not me.
So there's almost like, there's a couple of things I'm taking from this. You needed to fall in your own business to
100%.
understand entrepreneurs.
100%. I'd had a very successful career. I trained as a chartered accountant with PwC.
Yeah.
I failed my accounting final exams the first year I sat them. That was a bit of a fall, but I passed them the second year and carried on and moved internationally with PwC. Ended up, I was 2 years with PwC in Zurich, Switzerland. And I ended up getting an incredible job offer from my biggest client, which was an American tech hardware company. And at the ripe old age of 27, I became the number 2 finance guy in the Swiss subsidiary of this business that turned over $500 million.
It's almost like life was preparing you for this moment. You do see that?
There you go. So yeah. And so when the fall came, it was hard. But I look back on it now, and it was 12, 13 years ago. And I mean, I can't say it was the making of me, but it was certainly something that has shaped the human being that I've become.
To me, it does, but I also think you become more relatable when you understand the fall. I think, I never understand people when they've made it. I know when a person can relate to me is when they've fallen, because then they take a very different narrative.
Yes.
To how to approach where you are. They know where, they can see which level you're in and saying, okay, here is where it is. And I feel almost like your that fall had to happen for you to go and then go into that other dip of like, what's your past life? Because then you realize yesterday wasn't the same, but you need to edit, like, you have to edit out and strip out. Like you said, you and I don't longer, like you tell your clients, you and I are on different paths, but let's get you served elsewhere. You are also okay with that confidence, how you're going to move forward, even though it's uncertain. Like from my point of view, I would have been like, but what if it fails here as well? And as a woman, you do end up going, because let's say in the Asian culture, there's a lot of criticism if you don't make it. There's a lot, but they don't do it they never do it out of you can't make it. They're always like really protective about you. So they're like, are you sure this is what you're going to do? What if it doesn't work? And then, and you have that noise huge in your head. Yes. So when you have to take out that dollar or you have to take out that pound, that voice and that are just going head to head.
Yeah.
And so having what you're sharing, when I saw the title, Add Then Multiply, I was like, oh, that's curious, because that goes against everything in the head, because it's more like abstract. How do you subtract and still move on? And you can't do that as far as I'm concerned.
Not only that, it also breaks a fundamental rule of mathematics or of arithmetic, where you're supposed to multiply first and then add.
Oh, yeah.
I've always been a bit of a rule breaker. So when my branding guy came up with that, I just said, yeah, perfect. I love it.
Oh, so you didn't come up with the name. They came up with it.
No, a very good friend of mine came up with it.
So can I ask you, has there ever been any woman entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, that story you've met that made you really shift and more passionate about what you do? Was there any stories that really changed it?
I mean, yeah. So I in the Funded Female Founders book, I actually share the stories of 7 female founders in 7 different industries in 4 different countries who have successfully raised money. And they are all inspirational. And I've got many other stories of inspirational women, but I'll tell you the story of one. It's a lady called Dr. Daniela Marino. She's Italian, but lives in Switzerland. Ever since she was a small child, she knew she wanted to go into something medical. And she ended up doing her PhD in, I can't remember, some kind of biology at the University of Zurich, the ETH Zurich, which is a really, really prestigious university. And she ended up going in and specializing in burns. And she was working at the university doing her postdoctoral stuff and writing research applications for grants and things like that. And she realized I could write these applications for grants and stay on at the university, or I could go out on my own and launch my own business. And she decided to launch her own business. She has now, over the last 5 years, raised over $50 million. And her business, which literally manufactures personalized skin tissue therapy for people who have really bad burns. And they are now going through the final stage of clinical trials. And once they've gone through that, this business is just going to fly.
I can imagine. But what a mission as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But she's a very, she's had to be very laser focused, very disciplined. And she's done this while raising a couple of kids.
Oh, so she never gave up this work life.
Nope.
Oh, that's interesting. I got to talk to her.
She's fabulous. She was one of the speakers at our event in November. She's fabulous.
That's right. And have you ever had one of those women who've had very disadvantaged backgrounds and have been able to pull through? Let's say they had a lot of financial restrictions.
I don't have as many stories around that. I have one story of a female founder who is Black, lesbian. So she's got sort of, woman, Black, lesbian, all as kind of ticks against the standard, straight white male type of thing. Yeah. She did have a background in investment banking, which she said she had to work her socks off and work 3 times harder than anyone else to succeed in. Yeah. And then she left that world and went into entrepreneurship, and it was like starting all over again, because everything she learned in investment banking and all of the people she knew in investment banking didn't help her in the world of entrepreneurship, and she had to do it all over again.
Isn't that interesting, though?
Yeah.
And what is she doing
resilience.
Now?
It's that resilience. She now runs a business called, oh gosh, she's one of the people in here. I should know. Yeah, she runs a business called Glassworks London. It's a fashion business. So she's become a fashion designer.
I like these. I mean, you must get so much. I don't know. It's like there's a feeling inside of you that feels really warm and just like complete, that you've seen somebody grow into themselves.
Yeah.
Do you get that as well?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And, and it's something I had earlier in my career when I was a CFO. Whenever I came across promising people in my team who didn't have an accounting qualification, I would sponsor them and push them and cajole them and get them to do that. And I've helped half a dozen, mainly women, during their careers get their accounting qualifications, including 2 women in my team today.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Are you ready for this one? I have a lot of male friends, but they love sitting in the background. They always like to sit in the background. And so I'm like, why aren't you a little bit more vocal? And they would be like, no, it's not my thing. But I find sometimes, and I try to explain to them, actually, it'd be nice if you champion, because it really supports the distance. It will make it closer, because instead of seeing it as female versus male, we can come together.
Yeah.
Right? We start being humans. I go to the level where it's not about gender anymore. It's just humans.
Yeah.
Can you give me some suggestion on how to support without using, because allied, even the word ally is like a word that that people roll their eyes to.
Yeah. So, I mean, in sort of in response to what you were saying and some of the other men that you know and the challenges that you give them. So I guess first up, I grew up in Canada, so we're already sort of more direct and outspoken than most Brits are. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and my family was loud when I was growing up. So to be heard, I had to be loud.
Yeah.
And so I've always just kind of had that. I'm willing to put my head above the parapet.
Yeah.
I've been shot, I've been quote unquote shot at a few times figuratively. But one of the best pieces of advice that I got from one of my mentors was, don't try to be in the spotlight, be the spotlight.
Oh, explain that.
So there's an issue,
Mm-hmm.
and I can either stand in the middle of it and say, hey, look at me, I'm going to make a big deal about this issue, or I can shine a bright light on that issue. And obviously I'm still very involved, but it's about the issue. It's not about me. And again, that was something that came to me through my own transformational journey in the last 5 years. That realization and that acceptance that almost like I was called upon by the universe to do this. This is why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
For your listeners who are spiritual, they'll understand. And for your listeners who aren't spiritual, they won't.
Well, I think everybody is spiritual to some extent. It's just they're either hidden away or they don't want to say it, but they are.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I felt called to do this. That woman, I happened to be speaking at that event. That woman happened to come up and ask me. I happened to be in a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank. I happened to have a friend at the stock exchange who could sort out running the event. All of those things were lined up. And
so it's almost like don't miss the signs.
It was like a bunch of dominoes.
Okay, so it's almost like don't miss the signs.
Yeah.
Like I just happened to be there,
I just happened to be there. And well, again, if you believe in that kind of divine intervention, I was put there.
Yeah.
Because the universe knew that this was my thing, and the universe put these signs in front of me, and I happened to be ready to see them.
So that would be one of those, like, if you want to show up and support someone, regardless of your gender, really, regardless of being ally or not. So let's strip it all away. If you just constantly see these signals of like support someone, just get up and do it.
Just get up and do it. Yeah.
I like that actually, because you're not being fake about it. You're not trying too hard about it. You're just waking up to like, I can do something here. Yeah. And it's constantly coming in my way. So I may as well just do it.
Yeah, exactly. And by getting up and doing it,
mm-hmm.
once I had done it and kept doing it and showing what I'm doing and telling people what I'm doing and talking about the things that are coming through, I became known for being the person who was acting as the spotlight, shining the spotlight on things, not saying, hey, look at me, but hey, look at this issue, this needs to be fixed. And I think that also really played an important part in my acceptance by the female founder community, because I wasn't coming in trying to mansplain some issue.
And that hits on something. How do you know whether you are mansplaining or not? Because a lot of people don't think they're mansplaining.
I have some very
don't mind me picking your mind about
very outspoken women in my community who would tell me if I was.
And have you ever had those moments where that you've been called out on it?
Early on, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, early on. When I was first practicing, rehearsing for my TEDx talk.
Yeah.
Because I've got a TEDx talk about this as well. It's called The Fight for Fairer Funding.
I want all these links, by the way.
I will give them to you.
To share it to the listeners.
Absolutely. Okay. And when I was doing my first rehearsing, I actually as part of my preparation, I presented it to 3 different Toastmasters clubs.
Yeah.
And one of them was an all-women club. And we had a conversation after the speech about mansplaining.
Was there anything really?
I had actually never even heard the term before that meeting.
Oh yeah, no, that's a conversation. You're like, oh, he mansplained, and then we roll our eyes to it.
Yep.
So what were the signals? Because some people genuinely don't realize they're mansplaining.
Well, it wasn't signals; it was direct feedback.
Okay.
And it was the way I was presenting certain things and the way I was assessing things, and I was challenged to support why that was my perspective or why that was my opinion based on what I'd found, and I was challenged around it, and we had a good conversation, and I actually adapted and changed some of the things in the final talk based on that feedback.
Was there anything really difficult in that whole feedback that you found very confronting?
No, and I guess that's because of two things really. And I know, we're both in the Toastmasters community. And part of being in the Toastmasters community is you get, every time you give a speech, it gets evaluated.
Yeah.
And you learn very quickly to not take the evaluations personally, because the person isn't evaluating you, they're evaluating your speech and how you delivered it. So that mindset already helped a lot. And I guess, the other part of it was just, having been through the school of hard knocks in life at various stages, I was receptive. I knew that I was the odd one out presenting something like this to a community of women. And it's funny, I sometimes use that in a humorous way now. I remember recently, a couple of years ago, I was sponsoring an event at the Women's Business Club, and I went up on stage to announce who the winner of this particular award was. And I looked out and I realized that apart from the catering staff, I was the only man in the room.
Ooh, how did that feel?
Well, I opened up my talk by saying, spot the odd one out. So, yeah, I guess, and again, I'm grateful to my mom and my wife and our daughters for giving me the confidence to be able to speak with women directly, and also to have learned that the way you interact with women is different than the way you interact with men.
So you never
and it's not that one's good or bad, it's just different. It's like that book, Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars.
Well, I haven't really
it's a bit
read
stereotypical, but women and men are different, and one needs to adapt. It's just like it's introverts and extroverts, and you need to adapt.
Do you find that you've ever had moments, because when you're talking about all this, I always go back to that word. I was annoyed with it for a while, which was imposter syndrome. Did you ever have those moments in that?
I had that immediately after the midlife crisis, when I kind of came back and was playing really small. I had that in a big way. I got over it probably within 3 or 4 years. And it's interesting because I have a friend from another entrepreneurs network that I'm a member of, who is a specialist in imposter syndrome and wrote a book called Outsmart Imposter Syndrome.
Yeah.
And I reached out to her when we were trying to raise the fund and weren't getting it away. And I had an hour's call with her, and I said, am I going through imposter syndrome because I'm not getting this? And she said, no, you're not. She said, you're absolutely not. But I have had that. And a lot of people do have it.
I think it's natural to have it, to be honest. If you don't have it, I mean, at least from what I've learned through, because I did a lot of on the Buddhist way of dealing with life, discomfort and everything.
Yep.
And one of the things is like, doubts is normal. If you don't have them,
oh yeah, no, doubts is normal and all
up.
that. But if you have imposter syndrome to the point that it's really stopping you from getting out there and doing what you want to do, then there's a book by a lady called Tara Halliday, Dr. Tara Halliday, and it's called Outsmart Imposter Syndrome.
I think
definitely
I came across
recommend
the
it.
book. Yeah. Okay, so the word being an ally means just basically getting over yourself, getting on with it. If the signs arrive, do something about it. And is there about expecting something in return?
I don't think there has to be. And I kind of take the perspective. I mean, I haven't made any money from running this business. I make my money from my Add Then Multiply consulting business. And maybe one day I will make money from the female founded business. And actually, what I'm looking at doing with this new idea is merging the two businesses into a new thing and kind of going all in with the whole thing. So that's probably ultimately how it'll come through. But I didn't go into this thinking this was a way I was going to make money. I didn't go into this, so in terms of that kind of return, the returns I've had have been much more social returns, much more, being invited to speak at female-led events. The number of times I've been up on stage speaking, and it was only the once where I was literally the only man in the room. But I was at an event last week where there were half a dozen men in a room of 100 people. And to be invited to come along and be recognized as being an ally and being a champion or a supporter or whatever you want to call it, that's a big return for me. And I look at it again. So both of my wife and both of our daughters are teachers. None of them are entrepreneurs. I don't know if they ever will be. But if they were, I'd want them to know that I had their back. And so I do this because I want to support women, because I think the way the world is just wrong, and we need to fix that. And I can't fix the whole world, but if I can fix my little corner of it, that's a good thing.
Talking about the world going on, I was just having this conversation in my head as you were talking. I was like, my God, I want to ask him this question. Going forward, AI is here. Women still are trying to get that gap closer, and AI. I just did a podcast about the ugly, the ethical, and the good of AI. But now with this gap and what's been fed into AI, there's still a lot of concerns around ethnicities, women, what it's pulling into.
Well, there's huge bias in AI.
There is, yes.
Because AI has learned what's out on the internet. There's a great video that was put out by one of the big advertising firms. I think it launched in New Zealand. And it's a young girl walks into a football stadium and it's dark. And she calls out, "Hey, internet," and it lights up. And she says, "Who scored the most professional football goals?" And the answer comes back, "Cristiano Ronaldo has scored, 147 goals or whatever." And then she says, "What about Christine Sinclair? How many goals has she scored?" And it comes back and it says, "Christine Sinclair has scored 198 goals, like well in advance of Cristiano Ronaldo." And she says, "So who scored the most goals in international football?" And the internet comes back and says, "Cristiano Ronaldo."
Yep.
And there's those kinds of biases. There have been so many publications. There's a book I can't remember the title of, but it looked at things like crash test dummies. And all of the crash test dummies were male bodies, not female bodies.
I think it was Invisible Woman, the book called Invisible Woman.
Yeah,
fantastic book. Fantastic book. But yes, it's about the test dummies and also about the underground. And women who have babies and they have to be in a pram and there are no escalators or elevators.
Yes.
And who made it, that kind of a thing. And I find AI runs the same thing. And I use AI, I'm using it now and everything. And people are like, "Oh, it saves time." But I'm like, but you got to check the facts. And now even more so with the political environment we're in and all this pulling back of DE&I for women, what is that going to signify in the funding industry? Should we be concerned? Is there something we could do potentially to ensure that AI becomes less biased for women? Because there's not that much out there. What do you think?
I mean, one of the beauties of AI is you can train it. But not everybody realizes that. So lots of people just kind of go into ChatGPT and type stuff in and let it come out. But if you're willing to put in the effort to train AI, it can, you can find ways that overcome the natural biases of the internet.
Yeah.
AI is a phenomenal tool, and we are only just at the very, very beginning of it.
Yes, that's what Paul told me.
I think, all sorts of different things. It was fascinating to watch when the Chinese announced DeepSeek, and the collapse in the share prices in America,
With
and
Nvidia.
one stock, Nvidia, market cap loss of Nvidia on the one day was bigger than the combined market cap of the entire FTSE 100.
That I did not know.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It was like $600 billion or something like that. It was unbelievable.
Well, considering they won Stargate, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think AI is a fantastic tool, and the more we use it, the more we're gonna learn and develop, and the more it advances. But yeah, we need to. If women are using AI, they need to train the AI first in order to address the inherent bias that is in the internet.
So does that mean bringing out more content?
I don't know the answer to that one, Kirti. I'm not a tech guy.
I'm going to have to go on this one, because this is where I'm like, how do I train it to make sure that the women's voices are being heard? Because what you're doing, I think funding, to me, I was just talking about this earlier. Women buy most of the products in the world. Let's be, even if you have to consider a car, a woman will be part of that decision making especially if they have a family, right? So, it boils down to the simplicity. Women are basically the consumers. A lot of it should be factored in. An Invisible Woman, the book, made me very aware of this.
Yeah.
So for a woman to be part of the entrepreneurial field and to be to contribute to how to make products thinking community-wise, I think we have to think together, like, male versions, female as human beings, we need to start thinking together. So for me, AI is now the next thing of how do we make that, ensure that it supports us thinking together. So that's why I was asking the question around AI. It's important.
It is. No, but and there are relatively easy ways that one can do this. And again, I'm not an AI specialist, but whenever I ask AI to do something for me that's going to lead to content being produced, I always tell it to act, in the voice of David B. Horne, the author of Add Then Multiply, because it's read the book and it comes back and responds in a way that sounds like me.
Oh, I
so
like that.
If someone else has some published content that's on the internet, then refer to that and say, go and look at this and respond in this style.
That's an awesome tip. And you're telling me you don't know? But David, I know we're coming to a close. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and letting me pick your brain. That's more than anything. Is there one thing, if you wanted women and men to walk away about supporting one another, what would it be?
Purely in the context of women and fundraising, it would be that women don't need fixing, the system needs fixing. And more broadly in the context of humanity, there's just too much testosterone in the world right now, and we need to figure out how to tone that down. When I look at what's coming out of America right now, and, being a Canadian, all of this stuff about, Canadians want to become the 51st state. No, they don't. But the rhetoric that's coming out and the wholesale dismantling of the DEI situation in the United States is very worrying. Mm-hmm. I think we all just need to just calm down a little bit, and work together, and the stereotypical roles of males and females have been around for centuries, hundreds of years, thousands of years, millennia, but they are changing. And, I look back to again, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and I look back, I remember the outrage at bra burning and things like that, and the beginning of the feminism thing, and when I was researching the book, I went back and looked at the suffragettes and Emmeline Pankhurst and all of that, and the fight that women have had to do just to become equal is staggering, because without women, humanity would die. Without men, humanity would die too. But, we need each other.
Yeah, we do. And on that note, I'm going to give that to keep that in people's minds for it and just simmer in it a little bit. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for saying yes. And for being the champion for women. I'm appreciative. Okay, so don't fix the women, fix the system. Before I share more about my thoughts around this, if you haven't yet, do share out this week's episode. You never know where this episode can make a difference in someone else's life. And together, you and I can do this. All right, so here's my thought. Be the spotlight. So from a male's perspective, don't stand in the spotlight, be the spotlight, become the spotlight for that person. Sharing that space can make all the difference, because the woman doesn't have to feel exhausted constantly having to prove themselves. And David's conversation shared exactly that. And for all the women audience out there, your voice really does matter. And knowing precisely what to say, when to say it, and how to say it without having to constantly fix the self, you can give a lot of room and space to yourself back. It's working. There are more women today taking on courageous steps. We know so much out there already. It's time to stand in that spotlight when someone is giving it to us. And if you're not sure how, contact me. I'll help support you. I hope you found this week's episode useful. Again, don't forget to share it out. Let's make a difference. Until the next one, take care.